As the prophet of esports, I rely on trustworthy and meaningful data every day. Data from our research partner YouGov offers the most complete view of esports fans and gamers in the world, providing context to who they are, what they think, the brands they buy, and things they do. YouGov's connected insights and research services inform strategy at every level. If you're a team, a brand, agency, or rights holder, you should be talking with YouGov. Their partners measure and maximize ROI and are telling compelling stories with data. Visit yougov.com/gaming-esports to learn more.
Let's start with the bad and then with the good.
Okay, let's start with the bad. Okay, so this is Tencent, and I call it bad news. But the headline here is Tencent vows fresh gaming curbs after spiritual opium, and this is a direct quote, attack zaps $60 billion. So the story here is Tencent said on Tuesday that it would put more restrictions on minors playing their video games. And basically there was a state media article that came out and said online games were spiritual opium. In other words, a drug. And so Tencent's shares got absolutely killed, wiped 60 billion of market cap, lost almost 10% of its total value. And just because of this, state-sponsored article, the state media article. Anyone here think, if you're an investor in Tencent, are you worried when you see something like this where literally, one article can wipe $60 billion of market cap from the business? And it let's face it, it's not like, hey, no one's playing League anymore. It's not like Valorant is blowing up your PC. It's not, this is literally, we think games are spiritual opium.
Well, I think clearly here we have the, it's a Chinese market dynamic issue. And this has been particularly highlighted in the last month or so with Chinese stocks. You had Didi, the Uber of China, came public, and basically, I forget what did they get banned in China or something? Like their app got basically taken out of the app store, and the stock went down like 40%. Then you had these Chinese online learning companies where the government basically said these can no longer be for-profit businesses, and they literally just went bankrupt. It was well, your business is no longer allowed to be a business. And no one's saying that's what's happening here. Obviously, otherwise Tencent wouldn't be down 10%. It would be down, 90%. But there's certain press in China where when they write an article, it's pretty well understood that that's the government sort of saying this digital opium line or spiritual opium or whatever, which is a bizarre way to phrase it, / interesting way to phrase it. But I think if you're an investor, you are worried that if the government is starting to want to crack down on gaming, the Chinese government has a lot of power, and that is a massive risk. Think about what happened back, I think in 2018 or 2019, whenever the government stopped approving games for 6 months. Tencent went down 40% over that period because basically the government said, hey, we're no longer approving games, no new games. That's something that can happen in China. So
are you guys not?
You got to pay attention to it.
Jeff, it's a great point, but I just extend that one step further. Are we not massively then worried about the mobile gaming market as a whole with how focused it is on China? And I'll just read some of the article. This is obviously translated, right? But it says, in the original article, the newspaper had singled out Honor of Kings, which is a mobile game, as the most popular online game among students who it said played for up to 8 hours a day. Spiritual opium has grown into an industry worth hundreds of billions, the newspaper said. No industry, no sport can be allowed to develop in a way that will destroy a generation.
Those are some serious fighting words.
Well, so there's historical context here that we can draw upon in the United States, and that's in the forms of the congressional hearings in the 1990s on video games. And I think that it just goes to show how behind in culture that a lot of governments are, first of all. And I think secondly, it goes to show that the regulatory regime is incredibly important for the growth of these companies. And it is very unfortunate because I know that you all have really applauded a lot of the moves that Tencent has made in the past, particularly in the past 2 or 3 years, but extending back to the past 5 or 10 years. They've had a brilliant strategy for growth, but none of that matters if your company is headquartered in a regulatory regime that can control it.
The Chinese government is essentially saying we've been applauding drug dealers. I mean, in no sort of uncertain terms.
Yeah, particularly
drug
comparing it to
children.
opium is such a stark, I mean, when you look at Chinese history, like that is such a stark, like that's the worst. That's like saying like,
it's inflammatory.
Oh, you're as bad as Coke in Miami in the 90s. Yeah. Like there's just,
you might argue that this regulatory sort of overhang might be also why Tencent is so aggressive, expanding outside the US, investing in all these other businesses. Now, obviously, the Chinese government could snap their fingers and literally make them divest all those assets or whatever, do any sort of things that wouldn't be legal here in the US. But it is clear that Tencent's strategy the last 2 or 3 years has been to diversify outside of China. So I think we're sort of seeing why.
Right, but it's still, I mean, they still suffered a $60 billion loss with one.
Oh, of course, I'm not saying right, but like they can't, just the government. That's where they are headquartered.
I know,
but meaning
what ecosystem they operate under.
The extension of your point is, will we see them accelerate their investments outside China, maybe? And that could be good for the U.S. gaming market potentially, right? If we see a lot of Tencent dollars coming to the States.
I have wondered why we haven't seen more of an exodus from China. Just especially after Didi's listing in particular. And I mean, there's been all kinds of problems with all these large tech companies within China. And I keep wondering if we'll be seeing that innovation eventually move outside. But I don't know what the dangers are to the people who actually run the companies. So maybe we won't.
I mean, people often ask me why I don't build companies targeted at these markets. I mean, this is why. To not have to deal with things like this. But Jeff, you've made me a believer in that. I think this might be a good thing for the U.S. market if Tencent starts applying dollars, and they're smarts, frankly, because they really are, I think, some of the smartest gaming people in the room, to the U.S. market in a much more concerted way. We may see even crazier prices for developers in the U.S.